Every now and then I do topic videos that intersect with my interests that I talk about on this channel. The topic of how to fix comic books is something that I've had in the back of my head for a long time now, but I've been putting off doing it for a couple of reasons. One, you might say, comics don't really need to be fixed. I would say, yeah, they do. Just because superheroes are at an all-time high in movies and television shows, that success does not translate back to comic books. Sales on comics are just as low and mediocre now as they were before the Dark Knight movie hit record numbers in theaters back in 2008. So yeah, I do think that comic books need to be saved, and that's the other reason why I have been holding off on doing this video, because certainly there's going to be people out there who will say, who's this jerk think he is? Does he really think that one little video can fix an entire industry of entertainment? And no, of course I don't. But the kinds of videos that I do on YouTube are always meant to create a discussion among a community of like-minded folks. All I'm doing here is sharing my thoughts on what I think could make comic books sail back to a place where they should rightly be. Not all of my ideas are necessarily 100% great ideas, but we would never know unless we saw them implemented, which, so far, we really haven't for any of these ideas. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to mention that some people will point to the sales of comics from the 1940s and then point to sales now and say, look, sales have dropped so much. And sure, that's true to an extent, but also the world we live in is so very different now. In 1940, we did not have multiple televisions in each house, Xboxes, PS anythings, or mobile phones. Back then, you had a radio in your house, and if you had a TV, you were lucky. The source of entertainment back then was considerably smaller than it is now, so more people went to the comic book because the comics was where you would go if you wanted a good story. But now people go to the theater, or they go to Netflix, or they just go to their computer and download something illegally. The way people live their lives now is very different than the way lives were lived back then, and that's going to skew the way the numbers look when talking about the sales of comic books. And with that being said, I want to spend the rest of this video talking about 5 ways I think the comic book industry could be considerably improved. Number 1. More pages for less money, kind of like manga. Dragon Ball Volume 1 is $7.95 for 192 pages, and it came out in 2003. In 2003, a single issue of an American comic book would cost you about $2.50 for 22 pages of story. That means that, for an American comic book, you are paying over double what you would pay for the same amount of pages if you bought a manga book. For as long as I've been reading comics, I haven't seen any comic book company try to follow this business model. Sure, some of the audiences for manga and anime comes from the otakus who foam at the mouth over the characters, creators, and such, but a lot of the popularity of these things is that it's just easier for the potential fan. If you have no vested interest in Naruto or Spider-Man, and you could choose to spend your $8 on almost 200 pages, or on about 40 pages, which would you choose? Of course you would choose the manga. I have seen Marvel try to emulate this business model a little. Series like The Runaways, Aranya, or the early 2000s Human Torch series have been printed as digest-sized books, which are about the same size as a typical manga book that you might buy. And I just know that those were done in that way to try and target the fans of the manga. But they really aren't trying that hard, since most of their output is the normal size trades that are usually something like $20 for roughly 4 or 5 issues of material. Number 2. In order to justify more pages for less money, go back to a cheaper paper quality. If people keep their comic books polybagged anyway, they won't need a slick glossy paper that is going to be more expensive to print on and therefore makes the comics more expensive to buy. I've very slowly seen DC Comics start doing something like this, and it'll be interesting to see if this continues or if it will be just a hiccup that doesn't last very long. But 3 of the trades that I've recently bought from DC that were printed somewhat recently have been printed on a lower paper quality. This doesn't impact the story in any way, and as long as I'm not leaving the book outside to get rained on, these books are going to be in great condition for years to come. And these books cost me about $15 each. Compare this to a new hardcover at Marvel, which cost me $25 and has less issues in it. More bang for less buck, and I'm going to be more likely to spend my money on something like that. Number 3. More accessible outside of specialty shops. I like going to comic book shops. I like being able to chat about comics with other people. I like the atmosphere at my local comic book shop. But if you want non-comic book fans to go from the theaters where they just watched a comic book movie that they think is really cool to go buy your comic books, you need to go back to putting comic books in lines at grocery stores, on spinner racks, etc. We're already partly there. My local Books A Million has lots of graphic novels, and every time I'm there, the aisle where the graphic novels are kept always has someone else there looking for stuff. But there's more that can be done. Like I said, put comic books back in grocery stores. You've got a little kid waiting in line with his mom who's buying groceries. He sees a Spider-Man comic right there next to the Pokemon cards in line at the cash register. He's going to bug his mom to get him that Spider-Man comic. And if the prices are kept in check, which can be achieved with lower paper quality, then the mom has no reason to not get her kid that comic book. There's a sale that you would not have if you persist in keeping comics only in the comic book shops where only the existing fans are going to go. Number 4, less crossovers in general. There is a reason that I loathe these things, and I'm not the only one. It's not just that it makes things harder on me, although it does. Think about this. If you are a brand new comic book reader, you're not really familiar with how any of this stuff works, but you saw a movie or a cartoon and you're interested in reading this stuff, and then you come into a comic book shop somehow and you want to read, let's say, an issue of X-Men. Chances are that theoretical new reader is never going to read another comic book again. Not because of the quality of the issue, but because the issue itself is so inaccessible to the new reader. Last year, the X-Men franchise went through a gigantic crossover called Battle for the Atom. 4 of the 2 million existing X-Men books were involved in this crossover. If you are a new reader and you see issue 16 of All New X-Men, you're not going to have any clue what's going on. Because not only is this part of a 10-part story that started in another book, but the story itself is allegedly the culmination of build-up from a whole bunch of stuff going back to House of M, an event that happened 6 years ago. The theoretical new reader is not going to go that far back just for something that they were curious about a few minutes ago. It'd be cheaper and easier for them to just go back to only watching the movies and pretend that comic books don't even exist. And number 5, ease up on the 6-part storylines. This is tied in with my previous point. Usually a comic book will be part of some 5 or 6-part story, and then that will be collected in a trade paperback, which is sold as if it is one complete story. But these days, even that is not a complete story. That 6-issue story is really more like a single chapter in a long series of stories. When you have someone like Brian Michael Bendis, who at various points in his almost decade-long run on the Avengers franchise was working on 3 different Avengers books, a 6-issue story would be just a single chapter in his seemingly never-ending saga. And all of the storylines in, say, New Avengers, even if you read all of them together, even then, that would not be the air quotes complete story, because you've got to factor in Mighty Avengers and Dark Avengers. And don't forget all of the big summer events that are also linked to his work on Avengers, like House of M, Civil War, Secret Invasion, Siege, Age of Ultron, so forth. These days, it's cause to celebrate if you can find a single issue that is not part of some huge crossover event, either with other titles or a big summer event that has tie-ins in existing series. This is why the Hawkeye series by Matt Fraction was such a pleasant surprise for me, because each issue was a standalone story that stood on its own and told a complete story in 22 pages. There's 2 reasons that the companies do this. One I've mentioned before is that it's just easier to write this way. When a typical superhero series puts out 12 issues a year, it's just easier to come up with ideas for 2 stories a year instead of 12 when 6 issues equals 1 story. This is why writers do it. They can get paid more to do less, so they are going to do that. But also, these companies are, at the end of the day, only interested in our money. Sure, sometimes you'll have an auteur who is interested in art and the craft, but that is the exception, not the rule. Most of these people view their audience less like valued customers and more like faceless numbers who give them lots of money. And if I am buying X-Men Legacy, and only X-Men Legacy, they think that they can trick me into buying other series. So if X-Men Legacy crosses over with X-Factor, New X-Men, and Uncanny X-Men, and keeps on crossing over with these series year after year after year, then they've effectively trapped me and are forcing me to buy 4 times the comics than what I'm actually interested in reading. Because I want to read the complete story, and they know that. So they are going to make the complete story spread out across series that I'm not interested in reading. And they're not going to just do this once or twice, because then the guy like me who only wants to read 1 comic book series, he has a chance to go back to only reading that 1 series. So they keep doing it all the time. House of M leads to Endangered Species, leads to Messiah Complex, leads to Divided We Stand, leads to Manifest Destiny, leads to Messiah War, leads to Utopia, leads to Necrotia, leads to Second Coming, leads to, finally, I just want to stop reading comic books altogether. Even though there is, in theory, still a comic book series out there that I'm interested in reading, I can't actually read it because Marvel won't let me. In my mind, if you wouldn't leave a movie after only watching 10 minutes of it, then you would not only buy a tenth of a storyline in a comic book. And if you only buy that one series that you are interested in reading, then that's exactly what you are doing. You're only getting that 10 minutes of the movie, and then you are missing the rest of it. And Marvel knows this, so they keep up with these tactics, but it does not bring in new readers. All they can ever hope for is to keep their old readers from leaving. And it might work for a little while. I was part of this dreadful load of garbage for about a decade before I finally just gave up on it all. Of course, I haven't completely stopped reading comic books, but now I try to pick and choose what looks good. And even then, I still can get caught in this never-ending web of, this ties into that one series that I've never read, and if you want the story to really make sense, you should really go and read that first. Can you imagine if you know nothing about comic books trying to penetrate all of this? It'd be easier to just give up, right? And I imagine so many people do just that. The 1% of the people who made the Avengers movie gross $1 billion, those people, if they wanted to get into comics, I can't believe that any of them actually stuck with it, with how impossible it is for even seasoned pros to keep up with all of this garbage. I know this is all sounding a lot like point number 4, but really this was all just to illustrate the necessity of point number 5. Keep it simple, guys. Don't do the 15-part stories that tie in with big events and other series. If you've just rebooted your entire company, don't have all of your 52 titles cross over with each other within less than a year. All you really need to do is let each series exist on its own. If you're afraid that people won't be forced to buy the other series, then perhaps you should focus more on making sure that each series is worth picking up. Then people would be more likely to actually do that, and without being tricked into doing it by your dirty schemes. Make sure that each issue is worth the money that the fans paid for it. If the fans are paying almost $5 for an issue, it better not be part 1 in a 6 or 12 part story. Can you imagine paying $5 for 20 pages of a novel, and then after you read the 20 pages, you have to pay $5 more for the next 20 pages? This sort of behavior would be inexcusable in those circumstances, so they shouldn't be excusable in comic books at all. These are just a few very basic ideas, really. I'm sure you can think of more, I can as well, but I figured I should stop now before my blood pressure rising gets me killed. Did you guys like this video? If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you did like this video, I'll be back tomorrow with some other kind of video. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.